Thank you so much for joining us. My name is McKaylee. I'm the Director of Marketing and Events at Tattered Cover Bookstore. We're so excited to have you join us today. Thank you for spending your Wednesday afternoon, evening with us. We've been hosting some virtual events this week, and so if you're new to our virtual event process, welcome. We're excited to be exploring this virtual community with you all. Just a couple of updates about Tattered Cover. 3 out of our 4 stores are now open to the public. Our Colfax Avenue location, Aspen Grove, and Union Station. Hours for those vary on location, but our Aspen Grove store is open 7 days a week, which is very exciting. And then we also have exciting news of that we are going to be opening our historic downtown Lodo location on Friday. So that's going to be open from 10 to 6 on Friday. And that store will be open Tuesdays through Sundays. So we'll be closed on Mondays, but otherwise you can come in with masks. We have other safety precautions such as gloves, sneeze guards at our cash registers. The Lodo Cafe, however, will not be open just because that takes a little bit of different finagling for us right now with the food service industry and the different Colorado regulations for that. But the bookstore itself will be open and masks are required, like we said. Additionally, our website is still open 24/7. We are still getting great online orders. Thank you for continuing to support your local independent bookstore in that way. We really appreciate it. And so you can shop with us there as well. Just so you're aware, closed captioning is enabled for those who might need it on this video. You just need to click the little CC button at the bottom of your video screen. It's also going to be available when this video is posted after the live stream ends. So if your internet cuts out, you need to run to the bathroom or something and you miss a little bit, you can always watch it back using the same link that you're on right now. So no problem there. I want to go ahead and move on to introducing the 2 authors that we have here today. We have 2 authors, David Roberts and Roman Dial, in conversation with one another. David Roberts is the author of 24 books on mountaineering, adventure, and the history of the American Southwest. His essays and articles have appeared in National Geographic, National Geographic Adventure, and the Atlantic Monthly, along with other publications. He lives in Watertown, Massachusetts. And then Roman Dial, who we're talking about his book today, The Adventurer's Son. He was once called America's most imaginative adventurer. Roman Dial is a pioneering outdoorsman based in Alaska, where he's made full-length traverses by foot, ski, pedal, and paddle of the Brooks and Alaska ranges. He's a professor of mathematics and biology at Alaska Pacific University in Anchorage. The Adventurer's Son, a best-selling memoir about the 2-year search for his missing son, is published by William Morrow. And we are excited to welcome both Roman and David, and I'm going to have them turn on their videos. There we go. Hi, David.
Hey.
Hi, Roman. How are you both?
Good, thank you.
Good. I'm so glad to hear it. I'm going to step back and let the 2 of you take the show from here. So after you guys converse, make sure you audience viewers think about your questions because after they have their conversation, we're going to continue the conversation with a little Q&A. So think about your conversations and I'll pop back in for that. All right, take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm really happy to introduce a very great book by an old friend of mine, but it's a great book despite the fact that he's my old friend. The Adventurer's Son is about Roman's son, Cody Roman Dial, or just Roman II, who at the age of 27 in 2014 set off solo to traverse a pretty scary rainforest in Costa Rica and simply didn't appear again. He disappeared. Roman spent 2 years searching for him personally, hunting down every lead until finally he learned almost inadvertently what had happened. And out of this tragedy, he was compelled to write a book, which, as I say, is a very, very moving and important book. So I'm going to start by asking you, Roman, why did you feel you had to write the book and how did you come to it?
Well, I felt like I had to write the book for several reasons. One reason was just for myself to kind of process everything that had gone on. And I'd been keeping, notes in journals and notebooks because I needed to record information as I was looking for him. And as time progressed and stories would filter back to Alaska and through my friends and my family, I realized that they weren't getting the whole story, and I really wanted to be able to tell the truth about what happened, especially after a reality TV show kind of took hold of the story. And I wanted to make sure that it was all out there. And from my own perspective, I came to it revisiting my young family life. Like, it was very nostalgic to go back in time and to think and process. You know how it is, because you've written more books than I'll ever write, and when you write things, it's a great way of sort of coming to an understanding about what's going on. I mean, the process of bringing something into your eyes, through your head and out your fingers, really makes you understand it more thoroughly and to appreciate it. And so writing about, my young family, and then writing about my son's trips through Central America that he told me about through emails and through his notebooks, and then looking for him, writing about that was all really helpful for me, just to kind of put it all together, this, really horrible tragedy for me.
One of the things I admire most about the book is that it's really a rationale for raising your own son, your own children, to live the same kind of adventurous life that was so important to you. But you've caught a lot of flack for doing that, especially after Roman died. People said, that your example could have helped lead him to his death. I think both of us totally reject that, but I'd like to hear you say why, after all, raising your son in your own mold was the right thing to do.
When he was born, I wanted him to be close to me and to my wife Peggy. I wanted to have a close knit family, and the friendships that I had and the relationships that I had that were closest were ones that, like the one I had with Peggy before we got married and had children, were built on outdoor experiences and being in nature and doing things, adventurous things. And so I immediately wanted to do things with him when he was born, and we started at quite a young age, when he was like 3, and we continued to do things through his whole life. And I felt like we really bonded that way. I had a lot I wanted to share with him, and I really enjoyed being in new places with him and watching him do new things. And and of course there were some things, because I was quite young when we had him. There were some things that I probably shouldn't have exposed him to. And then when he went missing, I of course reviewed in my own head all the things that we'd done, and I wrestled with, had I done the right thing? You know what I mean? Like, if I hadn't taken him out there, would he have disappeared? If I just let him, do what every normal kid would do, would he have ended up on his own in this remote corner of Costa Rica alone? And ultimately, it's like those famous lines from Tennyson. It's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. And he wrote those lines about a friend of his whom he lost. And so, but I really did wrestle with this a lot. I mean, I still do, even though I wouldn't change anything. I still will be driving in the car at some point and something will come into my head, and it doesn't have to be an outdoor oriented thing. Something just comes into my head and I think, wow, maybe if I just done this, he'd be alive today. But I have come to the conclusion that I don't know. I'm sure I did lots of things wrong, but I can't see any chain of events that led to his death.
When he went missing, you immediately went down to Costa Rica and searched for him yourself. And I think at first you had a lot of confidence that you could probably find him. But could you talk about the roller coaster of all these false leads and these horrible rumors that you heard? It would send you off in one direction and then another.
Yeah, yeah, it was a roller coaster. I as soon as I realized that he was missing, and I was kicking myself for that because he'd sent an email and I hadn't read it. I'd been out on my own trip and I came home, and there were things to do because I'd been away for a week and he'd been gone for about 6 months at that point, traveling through Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras and Nicaragua, and we'd hear from him every couple of weeks. And he'd ask me about some secret maps. I thought he might want to cross the Darien Gap, that really notorious, lawless gap in the Pan American Highway where, not only are there typical jungle hazards, but there's, human hazards there too. And I knew he kind of wanted to go there and he was looking for maps to get. And I saw this email and I thought it was just about maps. So I took off with Peggy to go fishing, and we were working on the house, but we didn't hear from him, and he would almost always get in touch every couple of weeks. And so when I opened the email and realized that this email wasn't about maps, it was about him going in for 5 days, and he'd written that 15 days before. I got really I don't want to say I was freaked out, but I was alarmed. And so I made some telephone calls down there and sent some emails and immediately left because I thought he was hurt, lost and broken in the rainforest. And I was going to go find him. I really believed that. And I took a good friend of mine with me and we rushed down there, and I thought it was going to be like a rescue mission. And then when I got there, and I'm very grateful, and I didn't ask anybody to go look for him. I get a lot of flack from people, who look at my book and think I was expecting the Red Cross and the Costa Rican government and everybody to do this. I just wanted to look myself. He was my responsibility. You remember in the old days when climbers got hurt or got in trouble on the mountains, there wasn't a rescue group. The Park Service didn't go get them. We climbers went and rescued ourselves. And that's kind of how I was, raised. And so I went down to get him myself. I was just letting people know that he was missing. I didn't sit home and go, hey, why aren't you finding him? Go out there. I went down, and then I got there and they wouldn't let me look, and then they wouldn't let me look. And then they told me that he'd been seen. So let me back up. In his email, he said, I'm going to go into the jungle to Corcovado, where he'd been before, Corcovado National Park. He and I had been there when he was like 11 or 12. He was a, elementary student who came with my college class that I was teaching in tropical ecology there. And we walked across Corcovado along the beaches as a group. We had no guide. And then he came with me again on a research trip a few years later. And we had no guide. We just hiked in the jungle and did whatever we needed to do. But he wrote me that they changed the rules and now you needed a guide. And he'd been traveling for 6 months. He's sort of a frugal and budget traveler. He writes that he's running out of money. He doesn't want to spend, $40 or $50 a day for a guide when he's perfectly capable and had been capable of walking across Corcovado since he was, 11. And so anyway, he decided to go in on his own without a guide and more or less illegally. But he told me where he was going and the path he was taking and sent me the map of where he'd be. And so I was equipped with that information and I forwarded it on to the officials in the park, being a responsible father, and showed up. But they decided not to look where he'd said that he would be. And instead, they told me that he'd been seen walking outside of the park on a tourist trail with a guide who was he wasn't really a guide. He's sort of a ne'er-do-well drug dealer. And it didn't add up, but at least, it sounded like he was alive. And so he just wasn't showing up. And I remember calling Peggy on the phone after we'd gone out to see where he'd been seen, or a gringo who looked like him had been seen, and coming back and calling Peggy on the cell phone and saying, hey, Peggy, it looks like, he's around. He's just not contacting us. And, he's with some kind of sketchy guy, but, I hope he's not mad when he comes out and finds I'm down here looking for him. And she even asked me, well, what are you going to say when you run into him, you know? And I said, well, hey, Rome, you want to go on a hike in Corcovado? You know, that's what I said. And we kind of chuckled together. And then there was sort of a lot of, you know, quiet time on the phone when we realized it just didn't seem like him not to contact us, because we are quite a close family. So I went from this, oh my God, he's in trouble, to, oh, he's around, he's just not talking to us. And then the next day, you know, the Red Cross has arranged for a helicopter to go looking for him. So they didn't really believe fully that he was out. And we went and flew around. And again, in the helicopter, I look out the window and there's just, you know, no hope. I mean, to find anybody in the jungle from a helicopter, even with all the technology that's available. So I plummeted again. And this went on over and over and over. You know, I mean, my hopes would be up and then they'd come crashing down with the reality. And yeah, it kind of started going up and then down. And then over time, it just kind of descended slowly with fewer ups, mostly a trend going down. So yeah, it was a very difficult, it was the hardest time of my life.
Way back in 1991, I wrote a profile of you, Roman, for Outside Magazine, which they promptly killed because I think they didn't like the part of you that was sort of giving the finger to the authorities and saying, I'm going to go do what I want because I know what I'm doing. And in a way, Cody Roman was doing the same thing. As you say, he wasn't allowed legally to solo traverse this rainforest, but I admire his doing that, trying to do that, and I admired it in you. But it's something that even the editors of Outside Magazine couldn't get their heads around. Maybe you could speak to that.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. You know, I think about that, you know, that poem by Robert Service about, you know, the guys who don't fit in. You know, I'm not very good at reciting poetry, but they all end up here in the North, you know, and I think Robert Service is writing about the Yukon, but there's a bunch of us here in Alaska who don't really fit in. And Alaska is full of us who don't really fit in. And a lot of us feel that, you know, we, you know, this is going to sound super arrogant, I know, and I don't mean it to sound this way. I'm not, but we sort of, when you live in Alaska, where nature is kind of dominating over human, and you spend a lot of time in the outdoors, you realize that it's up to you to make the decisions about what happens. Society's not there to take care of you. And once you develop this attitude that, you know, that you can take care of yourself, then when people impose rules on you, it's harder to kind of, you know, see them for what they really are, which is that, you know, they're meant to be good guidelines to take care of things. And so in Alaska, you know, we can still hike off trails, we can build campfires, you know, we can go into real wilderness, not wilderness with a capital W, but true wilderness that's has no roads, no bridges, no trails, no towns, no villages, nothing. And we can go in there, we don't need a permit, and it's up to us to take care of ourselves. And so having experienced that sort of freedom and responsibility from a young age, I've always kind of felt like, you know, I can, and this again, I know this sounds horrible saying it, but I can kind of do what I want. And sure enough, you know, I've raised my son the same way. You know, I mean, we did whatever we wanted as long as it wasn't hurting other people. You know, I mean, we didn't take from anybody, and we didn't leave garbage all over. And so I do feel some responsibility, yeah, absolutely, that he probably thought, well, you know, I'm not supposed to be, they're not going to let me in here, but they're trying to keep other people out. You know, they're worried about other people, not people like me. I'm sure that's what he was thinking. So yeah, I guess that is something, some responsibility that I take. And, you know, maybe, you know, if I had kids when I was older, I would have been a little bit more responsible about that.
Well, in that vein, since his death, have you found your own appetite for adventure diminished, or modified?
Yes, that's a really good question. And to be honest with you, David, I don't know if that diminishment in the level of excitement is due just to the fact that my testosterone is just all drying up, or that I'm getting older, or that I don't want to risk my life, not because I'm so much worried about losing my life for me. I mean, I don't have a death wish or anything, but I'm a biologist, and when I die, I'm pretty sure I'm dead and things just are over. But having um, felt the loss of someone that I love dearly, I've learned that the more you love somebody who disappears or dies, the more it hurts you. So if I were to die, the people who love me the most, they're the ones who are going to be hurt the most. And I just felt like, for 40 years, I'd been really irresponsible in doing things that were very risky. Because if I were to die recreating, it's just recreation. I'm not even really, I'm just having fun for my own personal gain. And if I were to die doing that, I realized and I felt stupid once I had this light bulb go on. I felt really stupid that for 40 years I'd been doing that, and that, Peggy or my kids, how hurt they would be if I were to die. Just as when I realized this, I didn't know Roman had died, but I worried that he was dead, and it hurt so much. Like an artist friend of mine, he told me that love and grief, they go hand in hand, and so I don't, my friends call me to go pack rafting and run class 4 whitewater, which, I did for many years and really enjoyed it. It was like an addiction, and I would want to go all the time. and now I don't really want to do it. I still like to get out. I did a beautiful hike with these 20-year-old kids the other day, where we hiked up over a mountain and down into a splashy, class 2 creek. And I loved it. Oh, it was exactly the kind of thing I liked. And they had such a great time, because they'd never done anything like that. And they were just so exuberant, and the weather was great, and it was pure and true wilderness right outside Anchorage. And I loved that. So I still like to get out, but I don't need to scare myself the way I used to like to be scared, and I don't know. That's a really good question that you ask that I'm not 100% sure I can answer. It's a convergence of the aging and also of events that have occurred.
Before we run out of time, I'd like to read a few lines from you at the very end of the book that I think is incredibly eloquent, and that maybe sums up, if you don't mind my reading your own prose.
No, I'm so honored. I'm so honored to be here with you.
But I think this sums up really everything that the book goes through 350 pages to get to. So I quote, "Would I have raised Roman the same way, knowing that he would die on a path I led him along? The answer is obvious, but the question unfair. We never know the future. There was no single moment in Roman's upbringing that can be traced forward to his death. No chain of events, no cause and effect. Accidents happen. Time has passed, and while these questions no longer crowd my heart, they linger." Well, that just gets to me just to read
it. Me too. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Like that's. So I read the back of the book sometimes because it does make me cry. It does, and I cried a lot when I wrote it. But I feel like grief is in our heart and it stays there. And sometimes if you express emotion, you can kind of let it out. You know what I mean? And let it free. And I felt really good about writing the book, and it really did a lot for me. But I remembered something that you'd written or you'd said about Mountain of My Fear, which I think was your first book, right? The Huntington Climb, and the young man who died on that climb with you. And I kind of, and I don't know if this is exactly what you said, but it stuck with me that you'd kind of hope that writing that book would, and it's, it's like a famous story that you wrote it over spring break in 10 days or whatever the story goes. But I remember you saying that you'd written it and you hoped that it would sort of get some of that. And, there's no real words to articulate the feelings that you have when somebody dies and you feel somehow responsible. You know what I mean? And I'm sure that you felt that, because I'm sure that was your trip. It's been a while since I read the book, but I'm sure that was your trip and you invited him along. And so, I know that you had to feel, not that I'm trying to say, but if it were me, I think I know how I would feel in a similar situation. And I felt that writing my book in my similar situation would help me kind of with it. And it did, but it didn't help as much as I'd hoped. And I kind of felt like you had told me that once too, about writing that book.
Thank you. Why don't we bring in McKaylee and open it up to questions then?
Hello again. So now is the time that we're going to be doing any audience questions that you might have. There is a chat function that's next to the video that you're watching, and if you want to, you can type your questions in there. I know I want to just say thank you for the gift of this book that you've given us, Roman. It takes a lot to be able to open yourself up in that way and be vulnerable, and now sharing it with the world, and just thank you so much for that. I'm curious if you could let us know what you hope people take away from this deeply personal story, and what you, because obviously you wrote it for your own reasons, but did you have any thought of what others might be able to take away from it as well? Well,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times I wrote things, and I think, two things. One, of course, is that I hope that fathers especially, but mothers too, spend time with their children in the outdoors. I think it's really super valuable and important, and it's a good bonding, and you learn important life lessons. And that sounds really kind of corny, but I think we learn really primal lessons that are basic to being human, in the sense that it wasn't that long ago that we all lived outdoors all the time. And if we just scratch the surface of us, those abilities and those feelings for being there, being outdoors are there. And so it's a very basic and human primal experience for parents and children to spend time and bond that way from a young and early age and all the way up to being adult children. So that's one thing I was hoping, that even though it could lead to the death of a child, which I think the only thing I can think of that would be worse would be losing a child and never knowing what happened, or losing more than one child or your whole family, but even then I feel like it's still worth it to spend all that time and invest it. And then the other point that I would say that I hope people realize, especially young people, and I've had some people, I did a live opening book event, back before COVID, and some young person was there, and they emailed me and said that they'd never realized how, because they did sort of dangerous things and traveled alone in foreign countries, and they'd never realized how hurt their parents would be if something were to happen to them until I had expressed that. And so that's another message that, I'm not going to tell, because I've been a risk taker for 40 or 50 years, and I'm not going to tell other people that not to do it, and that's not a good thing. But I would like people to think about other people. Like, we don't fart in somebody's face. It's really rude. You know what I mean? And dying on somebody is pretty rude too. So I just think people should, outdoor people, because it just keeps getting riskier and riskier. There are some really great people out there who died in the mountains. They're great climbers, the best climbers in the world right now, and great people, and they died. And I don't know, I just would rather that not happen.
And so someone would like to know about your writing process and how this book, they imagine that this book differed from any of your other writings, but What was the writing process for this like for you?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So there's 3 parts to the book. And the first part is sort of, it's meant to be about raising, meeting my wife, coming to Alaska, falling in love with Alaska, moving to Alaska, meeting my wife, starting a family, raising a family, and then the last trip that Roman and I did together. That's kind of the first part. And it's meant to be about things that are directly related in my outdoor adventure life and to raising and having a family. There's a lot of things I left out. And a lot of those were old stories. And some of those stories I'd published before, like there's a story about climbing a mountain, the last mountain I climbed and quitting. I'd written different versions of that. Some of the stories in there came from notebooks that I took on trips. And I had other people read those stories and help me, with what they thought I should leave in and leave out. And then the second part of the book was I just took my son's emails and his notebooks, and I told the story of his trip. I narrated it from using those. And then the third part of the book was basically material that I'd written while I had been in Costa Rica. Kind of like, it started off, I would write down phone numbers and people's names and addresses because I was looking for my son. I was, trying to figure out what went on, drawing maps. And then people would say things and I would write down what they said. And then I would get back to where I was staying and I would think about what was going on and I'd try to figure out and I'd write it down, because when you write things down, you make more sense of it. And then it just kind of became how I felt, and so I kind of wrote from things I'd written already and then things that I remembered.
Speaking of the writing process, and I think this is something that David can chime in on too, is what advice do you have for someone wanting to write narrative nonfiction?
Do it.
Do it? Yeah, that's.
There's no shortcut. There's no magic formula. The trite old pablum, write about what you know, is good. And I think Roman has poured his whole life into this book. I think some of the very best stuff are those early adventures, like that wonderful hike you took with Cody Woman when he was 6 across that Aleutian Island. And when I read that, I said, God, I wish my dad had taken me on a trip like that when I was 6. And everybody was aghast that you could do this, 60 miles or 100 miles and in the worst weather in the world. And there's a kind of joyous idyll in that. I'm not answering your question, but I think it's unanswerable. And until you try, you don't know how hard it is, but until you try, you'll never do it.
Yeah, I like to, David's a real writer. I'm not a writer. Like my problem is I can only write about things that really move me to write. Like I have to really want to do it. Like you could pay me to go write something, but I wouldn't do a very good job of it. Science is different. I can do science. You can pay me to study something that I wouldn't think I would have liked. But to write, it's like Dave says, you have to do it. You got to sit down and do it. And there's other things I would want to do besides write about a topic I wasn't interested in. But things that I'm interested in, I love writing about them. Like I'm getting ready to go to the Brooks Range and I have like one of these little notebooks. It's like a little Write in the Rain notebook,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I haven't taken it out of its package yet, but it's this small, it's very small, and I keep it right here in a pocket of my shirt. And I just get all these really great ideas when I'm walking along through the tundra or following a trail, and I'll scribble it down, and I get all these ideas, and I like to fill little books up while things are happening. That's how I have to write. Is I write better while things are happening and while it's fresh and I'm emotionally involved. I did think once I wanted to be a writer. I would have loved to have been a writer, but I don't think I'm cut out for it, because I can't write about things I'm not interested in, you know, and you need to do that to be a writer. So advice I would give to anybody who wants to write narrative nonfiction from me, the only thing I can say is, like David said, he says, write about the things you know. I'd say write about the things that you love, that are close to you, that you're moved to write about.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice from whether you consider yourself a writer or not. You know, you have a book there. So, someone would like to know, which do you think is more challenging for adventurers, Alaska or the tropics? And Ned Fetcher says hi.
Ned Fetcher, was that his question?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Well, Ned Fetcher, he's like me. He has spent, I met Ned in Puerto Rico in the tropics, and he studies tussocks, which are the most challenging landscape feature that's, you know, not a cliff or a mountain in Alaska. And it's a kind of vegetation that's really challenging to walk through. So he would be a good person to answer that too. So he's just probing to see what I think. And Ned, I would answer Ned and say that I think the tropics are far more challenging, you know, because it's so easy to overheat. There's all these things that can get you, you know, you have to know the biology, you know, like which snakes to watch out for, which plants not to grab, how to keep mold from growing on your body, you know, how to keep from getting trench foot, how to stay dry or get dry after you get soaking wet. I think the tropics are far more challenging than Alaska. I think Alaska's like, yeah, that's why I live in Alaska, because it's
But Roman, on the other hand, Ned and I survived 50 days in the Revelation Range, and he swore he'd never go back to Alaska after that.
That's so funny. Well, he came back. He comes to my house here every so often when he comes through, because he heads up to study his tussocks up in the Arctic. So I didn't show, but I think those spending 50 days on a glacier in July would pretty much turn anyone away.
I have to be honest, I am such an indoors person. Like, I am very much like, I'm a reader, I'm a theater goer, like but listening to the two of you is so fascinating. And it makes me think about like my relationship with my own parents, and when they would drag me out when we first moved to Colorado when I was very little, and they would drag me camping, and, you know, the adventures there. And so you two amaze me. This is, and it was the same thing when I read the book too. It's just, this is so fascinating for somebody who claims to be very, very inside. And then there's my boyfriend who moves to Colorado and loves to climb everything. But I find you both just very fascinating. And, you know, it's really wonderful to see in the books that you've given us, and in this conversation as well. So just on that note, just thank you on a personal level. We do have someone, we talked about this actually before the live stream started, but David, people would like to know what the mountain is behind you. The picture.
That is Mount Huntington, and our route on the west face of Mount Huntington, which was the subject, as Roman pointed out in my first book, The Mountain of My Fear.
Nice.
Yeah, and you know, that's a very famous mountain in Alaska. It's one of the most beautiful mountains. If some people would say the most beautiful mountain. It's not a very tall mountain, but it's challenging from every side. And to put it in perspective, I think it may have only been climbed once before by one of the best climbers in the whole world, international climbers in the whole world, who came over from Europe to climb it. And then while David was still in college, he organized an expedition to go climb it by a new route that has become considered one of the classic climbs in the United States, or actually in North America, and gets climbed all the time by people. It's a wonderful route. So it's neat that he's got that on his wall. And it was taken by this former climber, another climber named a pioneering climber named Bradford Washburn, who after he stopped climbing, he kind of flew around and took these beautiful large format photographs of all these beautiful mountains. And he lived in Boston, and he was the one who sort of showed these photos and routes to the next generation, which was David's generation. And then David went and ferreted out all the mountains that Bradford Washburn had missed. And he was sort of the inspiration for my generation. And I didn't climb as much as David did. I got scared and backed off, and discovered, actually, even before that had happened, that I liked the whole landscape of Alaska, and so my contribution has been, well, we don't just have to climb mountains to enjoy the wilderness of Alaska. We can do whole mountain ranges instead. And so I'm looking forward, because I'm almost 60, to seeing what the next generation has in store for us.
Absolutely.
Roman, thanks for that plug. But I would like to say in turn that you have absolutely single-handedly revolutionized the idea of wilderness travel, going super light, pack rafts, bikes, mountain bikes on glaciers. I mean, what you've done and pioneered is unthinkable to my generation, even though we're 15 years apart, 20, no, not quite 20 years apart, but I have the highest admiration for the kind of exploring you've done, and tremendous envy, because I couldn't have done it.
Well, thanks for saying so. But I really, like I said, I really admire you, and you were an inspiration. I kind of think that each generation sort of adds to a tapestry. Like there's this tapestry, and we add our weave and our threads, and then we leave it off, but we've changed the color or the direction, and then we stop, and then somebody else picks it up. But we can trace. It goes way back. And the neat thing is that it, especially in mountaineering, there's with mountaineering, there's a tradition of writing about it. Like in boating, there's not much writing, but climbing is such a, like, why am I here? You think that a lot of times. And so somehow you have to process that, why am I here, by writing. And so there's very long history of intellectualizing what is in some sense the purest form of outdoor experiences, in my opinion. And I feel like, having been a climber and cutting my teeth on that, I gained the skills that I need to cross the landscapes. But the technology that we have today, that wasn't around. Like David gave a slideshow on the climb on Mount Huntington, the 50-year anniversary of the climb on Mount Huntington, and looking at the pictures and seeing the gear that he was climbing in. I mean, I don't think your boots had front points, and they were like spongy, floppy boots with the crampons, and having to pound in pitons. And today, people climb it and they don't really realize what was involved when the route had never been climbed and the gear was so primitive, and you had to just use your imagination and your pluck to get up these things, instead of saying, oh, well, somebody else, 500 other people did it. If they did it, I can do it. And today you can look it up on the internet and see all the photos. But if you were just going to fly up from the lower 48 and immerse yourself into the wildest, most challenging adventures, climbing Alaskan mountains would be it. But since David and Art Davidson and Ned Fetcher and all these other climbers, they took all the good pieces, so there really weren't great ones left for us. So we had to turn to other things.
I remember hearing, Roman, that when you climbed our route on Shot Tower, you said something like that. Pastor Roberts had got to it before I could.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we are just at about our time, and I just want to thank you both again, and thank you to our viewers who spent their evening with us for a little bit of time talking about the Adventurous Son. I just want to give you both a moment just to remind people where they might be able to find you on the internet, or what other works that they might be able to look up. David, do you want to start?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Just where people can find your work or find you on the internet, or anything else you have to add before we close out.
Yeah, I mean, my books are on Amazon and Wikipedia, but I also I've had cancer for the last 5 years, and that prompted me to start writing a blog about survival from cancer on Caring Bridge, which is a wonderful site for people in my sort of predicament. So that's sort of my main writing project right now. Is aside from new books, is Curing Bridge. You can look for me there.
Thank you for sharing that. And for you, Roman?
You know, I have a blog too, but I don't really do much on it anymore. Occasionally, I'm moved to post things. I've had it for, I don't know, over 10 years now, and I post routes and trips and feelings and sometimes some commentary. And then I have, you know, an account on Instagram, and I post pictures of my puppy and the kids I go pack rafting with and random photos. But that's about it for me.
Well, the other way that you can find Roman is by reading his book, The Adventurer's Son, which you can order now at tatteredcover.com. It's an excellent read, and we just thank him so much for moving beyond his little notebooks and giving us a bigger book that we all can enjoy. And so my name's McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover. You guys, like I said, once again, can shop with us online at tatteredcover.com. And I'm going to ask you both authors just to stay on, even though we're going to cut the live stream. But thank you guys again, and stay safe and happy reading.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All righty, and we're out.